a conspiracy. Not really, actually, but I would argue this is the start of a conspiracy. What I have here is the humble sugarcane, right? It's a grass, and grasses, like all asses, have holes. Now, it's a very interesting crop, actually. You plant it sideways, and being a grass, each of these ridges will let out its own stalk of sugarcane. And then, within a single season, a farmer working on an acreage can harvest somewhere from 20 to 40 tons of sugarcane stalks. But since it's such a wonderful source of what the name implies, sugar, and I would argue this is the best source of sugar known to us, we can actually ferment that sugar. And fermenting sugars gives us alcohol, but not just any alcohol, our favorite kind, ethanol. Ethanol is a great chemical, and today I want to talk about two of its chemical properties that are quite useful to our discussion today. The first is solubility. See, ethanol is part hydrocarbon and part alcohol. And as a small molecule, it allows itself to be dissolved both in non-polar solvents like petroleum and polar solvents like water. And that means that this alcohol can act as an intermediary, allowing water and petroleum to come together when there's ethanol in the middle. The second property is combustibility. Here I have an ml of ethanol, and here I have an ml of petroleum. Let's set both of these on fire. Voila! You can characteristically see that they both have different flames. In fact, you can even see soot coming off from the petroleum, and this petroleum soot is unburnt carbon. Characteristically, the ethanol is burning cleaner. This is a much cleaner fuel because of its small size as a molecule. It burns much more completely. Ethanol acts as a better fuel than fossil fuels for two primary reasons. The first is that the carbon in this ethanol comes from plants that are growing today. So the plants, they pull in the carbon and they make it into sugars that we then extract and make into this ethanol. And now that I'm burning it back into the atmosphere, I'm just recycling that carbon. But this petroleum comes from carbon that was buried millions of years ago. And that means that this carbon that I'm releasing today should have been in the ground millions of years ago, and now this becomes an issue. So environmentally, ethanol is a better fuel. It is cleaner in terms of its emissions. It's also better when we want to prevent new emissions into the atmosphere. Now, what if we bring the solubility aspect into play? That means we can blend ethanol into petroleum, and that would make a mixture that is part petroleum, part ethanol, and that mixture will burn dirtier than pure ethanol but cleaner than pure petroleum. That means petrol or gasoline, if we add ethanol to it, will be a lot cleaner. But you'll see something very interesting happen in a few moments. See, ethanol is not exactly petroleum. It doesn't burn as much. It's already out, but I still have a lot more petroleum left to burn. That's because ethanol does not have the same amount of energy per volume as compared to petroleum. Now that's a lot of smoke I'm inhaling, so let's turn it off for a moment. So when you blend ethanol with gasoline, you get what is called a blended fuel. But the true rise of blended fuels comes not from environmental concerns, not from wanting to inhale less smoke. It comes from the fact that there were oil embargoes.
Good evening. The Middle East war produced developments all over the world today. The oil-producing countries of the Arab world decided to use their oil as a political weapon. They will reduce oil production by 5% a month until the Israelis withdraw from occupied territories. If the Arab countries keep that pledge, it would reduce their production by almost 50% in 1 year.
Oil became scarce. Petroleum is an export commodity for some countries, but an import for many. And in order to reduce the dependence on it, countries started to blend domestically produced ethanol with gasoline. That meant they had to burn less gasoline per liter and in turn have to import in less. So adding ethanol to gasoline makes it good for the air, good for the emissions, and good for sovereignty. So people should love it, right? It should be great. Everyone should be happy. But if you spent time on r/Cars India, or you've heard the ramblings of Scotty Kilmer, you would know that that is not the case. Not everyone is happy. And before we can understand why these blended fuels don't get the love that we should expect them to, we need to see how internal combustion engines work. Let's use this as an example of an internal combustion engine system for a vehicle. This is the storage of the fuel. The fuel is connected through some piping into the engine. How does the engine work? There's a cylinder, a chamber, which has a piston in it. The piston moves up, and as it moves up, it compresses the air. We put a bit of fuel in it and set it on fire. The explosion causes the air to expand and push the piston down with such force that it powers the rest of the vehicle. And that extra gas that's created as it explodes, that gets pushed out as exhaust, fresh air comes in, and the cycle repeats itself. Vehicles have what is called tuning. We make sure, as engineers do, that the ratio of air and fuel is optimum for that chamber. That tuning gives us fuel efficiency. Recently in India, the government increased the ethanol percentage in the fuel from 10% to 20%. And that has now become the standard. There is no longer an availability of 10% gasoline. And this has caused a lot of pushback. While the government says that this is good for the air pollution, it is good for the imports, it is good for the emission targets of the country, people argue that this is harming them. Right, if we add more ethanol to the existing vehicle, a few things will change. The very first is the storage over here, right? So here we've added more ethanol to the fuel, and all along this passage, right, from the storage to all the piping and hosing that will make contact with the fuel before it burns, all of that is now going to be exposed to more ethanol than it was designed. And that is problematic for plastics and rubbers because ethanol can dry them out. It can degrade them. Second aspect is when ethanol gets into the combustion chamber. Now remember our tuning part, right? It is the design aspect where the particular amount of fuel and air ratios are set at the optimum level for the cylinder. And that means if you suddenly change the fuel, it no longer matches the amount of air that is being supplied in there. And that causes a drop in efficiency. The combustion is not as efficient. Furthermore, ethanol does not have more energy in it either. It has less energy. So even if it was burning just as efficiently, it would still give out less energy than before. So you get a mileage reduction. You get a drop in fuel efficiency because the combustion is no longer as efficient or as energetic. But there's another factor. Remember solubility? Remember how ethanol can also attract water? And water is everywhere. In the air as water vapor, as moisture. And that means in the fuel tank, it's attracting water, it's absorbing water. And now your fuel mixture has more water than it did before. So what happens when that water makes contact with any of the metal? Corrosion. But furthermore, when it gets into the combustion chamber, it no longer burns, right? In fact, water doesn't burn at all. It just turns into steam. And how does it do that? By absorbing energy. So all of a sudden, you have something that is absorbing energy out of the combustion. More drop in energy, more drop in fuel efficiency because there's less work getting done. And that is not just theoretical. Some people just shifting to E20, 20% ethanol blending from 10% ethanol blending, have reported as much as a 35% drop in mileage. It's not just the fact that the fuel has less energy, it's the fact that this machine is just not tuned or optimized or protected against the higher ethanol and water that is now being introduced into this entire system. For the Indian consumer, this can be a big deal because India, despite getting some of the cheapest crude oil in the world, actually pays some of the most expensive prices for fuel at the pump. Now, there's a bit of a ghapla going on in that, but that's for a different video. Today, what we do have to realize is that the pain felt in drop in efficiency, even if it's minor, is very significant for the Indian consumer who already does not have the most amount of affordability on the planet. The Indian government passed this bill, this policy, ahead of schedule actually, and did it in whole. This policy was implemented just fine on its own years before it had to be. That's unheard of, actually. That's frankly disturbing to see not just any government, but especially the Indian government do. And that makes you wonder why. Now, if you dig a little deep, not even too deep, you come across this very interesting fact. See, the biggest proponents of this policy has been Nitin Gadkari. He is a transportation minister playing environment minister. And if you look at his sons, they run two companies, Sian and Manas. And both of them provide government with the ethanol that is required for the blending. This single policy has catapulted his sons to become billionaires. In a country where 3/4 of the population cannot afford food security, we have another billionaire empire popping up.
माझी कमाई भरपूर आहे. माझ्या डोक्याची किंमत 200 कोटी रुपये महिन्याचा माणूस आहे मी. मला पैशाची काही कमी नाही.
Now, I don't want to join Sonam Wangchuk in the gulag, so I'll not say any more about this. But if you were wondering, how did such a bad policy get implemented so quickly? There might be an answer here, and most people would argue this is probably the answer. I won't say anything. I have no opinion. I would like to remain a free man. The government has mandated the sale of 20% ethanol blended fuels. That means at a petrol pump, you do not have the option of getting pure gasoline or E10 as many vehicles were designed for. Because until 2023, vehicles were only produced to be using 10% ethanol, that is E10. And any vehicle after that, of course, is compliant with the E20 fuel. But that is only 3 years old. So vehicles today, which are say 3 or 4 years old, are already outdated for this fuel. And that is why people are complaining. They don't have an option. They're forced to buy into this program, which brings in more moisture and damages the components of their cars. Their cars cannot get the same mileage and efficiency when they burn the fuel, and the fuel is still priced the same. That's right. The fuel is adulterated with ethanol. There's less gasoline in it. It has less energy in it. It works far worse for most people, and it still costs the same. And the government has actually declared that this program is so inefficient that it actually costs more to make blended fuels than it does to just sell plain gasoline. The complaint people have is not that the air is cleaner or the country is less reliant on the import of petroleum products. The issue is that they are suffering from bad policy. The issue is not E20 fuels, it's the implementation of this policy that is forcing people to buy E20 fuels which don't work for their systems or their wallets. See, Brazil is mostly a tropical country. As with everywhere, the oil embargoes of the 70s set Brazil down the path of blending gasoline. They have since invested heavily in technologies to better farm and extract from sugarcane. Brazil actually already offers 100% ethanol at the pump, and new vehicles there can run entirely on it. Older vehicles can get modded for blended or flex fuels. The price? Ethanol fuel can go as little as 60% the price of blended gasoline. Researching this part of Brazil got me down the rabbit hole of their car culture. Did you know that the use of 100% ethanol allows them to produce more horsepower due to the higher octane level? Big country, rich culture, fun people. Anyways, the point is Brazil has figured out a way ahead. They have successfully implemented 100% ethanol directly from sugarcane. Carbon neutral transportation. Their template is unique to them because sugarcane is a water-intensive crop, roughly 250 liters of water for every kilo of sugarcane produced, which is not something every place has. Still, they can offer a good direction and show us many of the mistakes that are possible along this direction. This has all just been an excuse for me to talk about policy and how environmental aspects become excuses, scapegoats for the implementation of such policies. See, the blending of fuels was never about clean air or reducing carbon emissions. It was always about reducing the imports of crude oil and petroleum products. Brazil has showed that such progress, such directions can also be taken if they're facilitated for the people. Good policy does not have to use environmentalism as a shield or as a scapegoat to justify itself. It can exist for the benefit of the people because environmentalism is also for the benefit of the people. There are many technologies out there that can help when it comes to emissions and environmental pollution. But when it comes to their implementation and adaptation into the society, it is always important to have good policy, good implementation. Implementation that is done not to benefit the sons of a minister in the government, but rather for the people and the economy as a whole. Nobody except one family will get to benefit from this lopsided and frankly pathetic implementation of policy The reality is that environmental policy always plays second fiddle. It is always used when it is convenient to push a separate agenda that is more profitable in the present date. And unfortunately, it'll continue to do so until adversity hits us directly in the face. To my Indian friends who actually care about their rides and their wallets, embrace fuel stabilizers, retune your engines, and replace any of the car parts with the compliant ones as you can. Until the governments care about the people, be strong, be kind, take care of your rides, and I'll see you next time.